Hello everyone, welcome to Remarkable Rare. This is Kayla.
And I'm Zohan.
And we're student advocates from the University of Notre Dame. Hosting episode 2, we have our series called Living with SGS. And let's get started.
Alright, so before we begin, today we have Melissa with us, who is the mother and main caregiver of Hope, who are willing to share their journeys with us. And it's a really incredible story with a lot of twists and turns, so I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So, to start it off, Melissa knew at the very beginning, when Hope was born, that there was something wrong. But just through your usual chromosomal testing, your newborn testing, and so on, there didn't really seem to be anything really wrong, right? They couldn't find anything. And
yeah, so let's move on to just Melissa explaining just what the early years were like.
When she was born, they first did a chromosome check with her, and there was no chromosome issues that were going on. And then every year from the time she was born until the time she was right before she turned 4, they were testing 3 to 4 genes. They knew it was a connective tissue disorder, but she kind of overlapping symptoms of almost all of them. And so they were focusing on just testing for Marfan, Stickler syndrome, Loeys-Dietz. It's one where bones break easy. I can't remember what it's called. But there were several of them that, they just kept choosing what to test for.
So, wow, that was an incredible story. So, I honestly thought it was amazing that they had the resilience and nerve to continue testing for 3 to 4 genes every year.
Yeah, I think one aspect too is just how young she was when this really all happened, and being able to get the diagnosis early is important, but just also recognizing how young someone is. It's hard to go through all those consistent testing, year after year, physician after physician, and so I feel like during these times it's super important where advocacy can step in and support these patient families as much as they can, because it really is an odyssey sometimes. So
yeah, I can't imagine what they were going through, having to do all of this and then, not knowing what's wrong, not knowing what to do, but, just having to keep going.
Yeah, I think, one thing that we should define just for the audience is just the concept of the Diagnostic Odyssey, and that's what episode 2 is called. And so you'll see the term Diagnostic Odyssey a lot in the rare disease space. And it's a very common just way to describe how long and confusing even the diagnosis process can be. But I don't know, how else would you describe it, Zohan?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty accurate. It's long and confusing, right? It's they call it an odyssey because it's both literally and figuratively a journey. For many of these patients, in their local towns, they don't really have the capability to diagnose this kind of a disease. So they have to physically, travel around the world to centers where they can maybe find a diagnosis.
Yeah.
And even then they often don't, and they just have to keep traveling and, keep waiting and hoping that one day, they can find out what's wrong.
Yeah, and we'll give it to Melissa in a second just to explain more about just how tiring and just very long the process can be. It definitely isn't the case for all rare disease families. Some people are lucky enough to get diagnosis within, a month even, but a lot of the times it does take years and years to get a diagnosis, if any, and there is a large just portion of people who are considered undiagnosed. Let's see what Melissa has to say about this.
So we had seen 3 genetic teams before moving here. And when we were in Denver, they clinically diagnosed Hope with Loeys-Dietz syndrome. But none of the blood genetic testing was matching up, but they at that point, it was still a newfound syndrome. The Dr. Dietz had, just established. And so they knew that like identifying which gene was responsible for Loeys Dietz was kind of still in the testing and in the works. And so she was clinically diagnosed with Loeys Dietz. But the genes that they had currently found at that point, I think the first 3 who were found at that point, she did not have. And so when we moved here, we saw the genetic team at Riley's. And the first doctor came in and visited with us, and then he called a whole team of people. And that's kind of what our experience was with everything, is like we would have an appointment with a geneticist, and she was a puzzle to them. So then they would bring a whole team into the room, to just examine her and to talk with us. And one of the guys in the team at Riley's just kind of chuckled and just said, well, she's definitely a puzzle. And he just said the only person that would be able to probably figure her out is Hal Dietz himself. And it was kind of a joke amongst them. And I had no clue who that was, except for I did recognize the last name Dietz from her clinical diagnosis of Loeys Dietz. And so I just said, well, can we call, can we get a hold of him? And because I said I would be willing to travel to see him. And they just said, they said he was at Johns Hopkins, but that it would probably be very difficult to get in. And so I drove home from the appointment that day, and I just looked up on the internet his information, and there was an email address. And so I picked out 10 pictures of Hope that were her most unique features. And I just emailed him. And within a half hour, he had emailed me, his assistant emailed me back and just said, hey, can you get us, as much medical information as you can about Hope? We will discuss her case tomorrow. We're having a big meeting with a bunch of geneticists, and we will go over her case tomorrow. And so then I called down to Riley's and had them forward a bunch of her files to Johns Hopkins. And they messaged me the next day and just said, stop testing, because at that point they were going to test for 3 more genes that year. And he said, I'm pretty sure she has Shprintzen-Goldberg syndrome. And why he was such an incredible, intricate part in her diagnosis is he is the one who found the gene responsible for Marfan. He found the genes responsible for Loeys Dietz, and the Shprintzen-Goldberg isn't named after Hal Dietz, but he's the one who found the gene responsible for it. And so he had actually personally seen a few patients that had Shprintzen-Goldberg syndrome. So when he saw Hope, and that's why I was saying about the visual recognition, like he saw Hope and he recognized the uniqueness of her condition from some of the other connective tissue conditions. And so then we tested for it, and sure enough, that's what her diagnosis was.
Yeah, Melissa, I think that it's so crazy how sometimes, you have to search up things yourself, and especially as a caregiver and a parent, sometimes, it's not as crazy just going to the top physician who knows the most about it.
Yeah, I find it really interesting how, it all turned out, that you go from just like a joke into this new diagnosis, and it just happens that it works, right?
Yeah, and it's crazy because Dr. Dietz, he was the one who discovered Loeys Dietz syndrome, and I think he has a lot of work with Marfan syndrome as well. And I think he helped identify one of the genes for Shprintzen-Goldberg, even though it wasn't named after him. He had a lot to do with just discovering the disease. And so just really going to the source in these cases, that's incredible. And that just goes to show with how receptive Dr. Dietz was, how much these physicians really do care and really are trying to, find answers.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely really give props to Dr. Dietz and his team, for being able to see this new case and just quickly diagnose something that nobody else were able to. So yeah, I think, beyond it just being, funny and fortunate, this diagnosis was also just a miracle, because if you remember back to episode 1, we mentioned the C1, C2 vertebrae thing. So, by finding out this diagnosis, Melissa was connected with the community of SGS patients, and it just happens that one of them mentioned the C1, C2 vertebrae thing and asked her to go check it out. And so they went to their neurologist,
Mm-hmm.
and she was like, "Can we get this examined?" Right? And you know, it turned out to be an incredibly close incident.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll go to Melissa and see what she has to say.
Right at her brainstem, her spinal cord was thinned to 3 millimeters. And at any point, it could, like one fall, it could have just been severed because her skull had grown into the spinal cord. And a safe point of reference for her age would have been 12 millimeters, was the smallest it could be, and hers was only 3. And so, like if she wouldn't have been diagnosed at the time that she was, and if we still would have lived in Montana through that year, she would have. They said that with this cerebral spinal fluid being so slowed down and the spinal cord being so damaged, she would have like just slowly lost function and just would have passed. And so we were very thankful for the time of the diagnosis because that is one of the huge life-threatening things with Shprintzen-Goldberg is a lot of the kids don't have a C1, and if they do, it's very underdeveloped, and so the instability with the neck, it just wears on the spinal cord. And yeah, and so that was just a huge thing.
Yeah, so as you can see, it was like really close, right? So like her spinal cord was like that close to just being disconnected, and then it's just a tragedy. But fortunately, they found this diagnosis, and it turned out well, right?
Yeah, and miracles are, very real, and that's just incredible. Just that makes the story a lot more incredible. I would say, especially in Melissa and Hope's case. And so, one thing that I did want to talk about, also related to this in the Diagnostic Odyssey, was just how important it is to get a diagnosis. And, there's a lot that parents and caregivers can learn throughout like the journey of finding that diagnosis. But once you do, there's sort of a part where there's a relief that you can put a name to it, but then there's also the side where you kind of have to mourn, because when you do find out about just the trajectory of the disease, the prognosis, a lot of the time, sometimes those can be really devastating. So what do you kind of say to that side of diagnoses?
Yeah, I think for sure, like when you get diagnosed with these kinds of diseases, like initially you're gonna get a shock, right?
Mhm.
And you're like unsure what to do,
Right.
and maybe you freeze up for a while. And like I think in the end of all of that, you just know that everything you previously thought about what like your life was gonna be, what everything was gonna happen, that's all out the window, right?
Mhm.
So, but after all of that, you just gotta come to accept it and move on. Which honestly, for Melissa and Hope, like I think they were really resilient and just incredible that they're able to just carry on, even though like you have this horrible diagnosis. You
Mhm.
just continue living and do your best, right?
Being able to find out the diagnosis can do a lot, and we'll move on to Melissa to see what she has to say, in particular about how incredible getting that diagnosis is.
Then when we got her real diagnosis, I at first kind of was for a brief time kind of overwhelmed because I thought we were already researching what we thought she had, if that makes sense. And so when I found out it was something new, I was like, oh, have we been so on the wrong track? And so, but I had reached out to the Loeys Dietz community, and I said, hey, does anybody, we were misdiagnosed. Does anybody know anybody with Shprintzen-Goldberg syndrome? And within moments, like when I was still online typing out messages, I was given 2 families to reach out to. And so I immediately reached out to those families. They, from Facebook, gave me their phone numbers. And so I was able to call 2 moms right away and talk through them. We talked through things with them. And then there was more of a piece that came, and just also having information of like, now where do we go from here? Like, because now if we were on a track of like monitoring, what we thought we were diagnosed with, like And that's where we got on track. Even when I was talking with the condition with her neck, with her C1, C2, it was from those two moms that I had gotten that information on what needed to be checked, because they were telling me, because they were also very aware of Loeys Dietz, because both of those moms were in the trial group of being diagnosed with Loeys Dietz, but then being redefined as having Shprintzen-Goldberg syndrome. And so they knew very clearly what the difference of diagnoses were. And so just having that information, I think with any, ultra rare disease, like any information parents can have is the most amazing tools you can get, because any doctor that you're going to see is most likely have never seen your child and will probably never see anyone else again with that condition. And so like the information that you get from other patient families is like, it's like worth more than gold, because, a doctor might shrug their shoulders and be like, I haven't seen this before, and another family's like, oh, we have that also, and this works and this doesn't work. And, and you have kind of a little bit of a roadmap. And so, but I think the emotion with the diagnosis when we had gotten her actual diagnosis, for a brief moment, it was kind of overwhelming. But then once again, I was super thankful that we were on track with being able to find out like how to better and more effectively give her the care that she needs.
Yeah, so I think those are really important, because being able to connect, like knowing your disease, you're able to connect to the right community. And this is where you are able to learn so much about the disease firsthand. And we'll talk a lot about that in our future episodes, and just talking about how important just being able to find your community with disease so rare, being able to know who can best support you and not make yourself so isolated when you're encountering a rare disease or experiencing it.
Yeah, I think like also with this, once you get this diagnosis, like before you're just like reacting to the disease, right? Like you see certain symptoms pop up and you're like, okay, let's treat the symptom, or let's fix that, right? But once you get a diagnosis, you're able to, get ahead of the disease a little bit and like preemptively know like, oh, this might happen, right? So you're prepared beforehand, and I feel like that would give you a lot of relief to know like, oh, this will happen and I'm ready for that, right?
Yeah, I very much agree with that. And just a huge thank you to Melissa for joining us in today's episode. Caregivers and parents really are the experts in the disease, and really thank you Melissa, for your expertise. And so the next episode 3, will continue to explore SGS from the side of the caregiver, and learn more about, from Melissa's perspective, how the disease has vast effects on the people around the patient, beyond just the patient themselves. So we'll see you guys then.
Yep. Thank you for watching.